The hospital stood in eerie stillness at the edge of Oregon's vast national forest, nestled between towering pines heavy with snow and winding roads that barely made their way onto any map. Hidden deep within its shadowy halls was room 214, a room that waited in silence, like a secret too old and too sorrowful to be spoken aloud. Dimly lit and rarely used, it had earned a quiet reputation among the night staff. They whispered about it during slow shifts, voices barely above a murmur, afraid the room itself might hear. No one could ever quite explain it, but patients admitted they're almost never recovered. It was cold in that room, not just physically, but in a way that crept into the bones and stayed, even when the radiators hissed and groaned with heat. Some called it the still room, others just made sure to keep their distance. That winter, Era Quinn was brought into room 214, just 7 years old and as silent as the snowfall outside. She was wheeled in wrapped in blankets, her skin ghostly pale and nearly translucent. The plastic tubing beside her trembled with each faint breath she managed to take. She had not spoken in days, hadn't blinked in response to light, hadn't turned her head at a single sound. Her mother, Mara, a once passionate elementary school teacher who had walked away from everything to be at her daughter's side, no longer asked questions. She had learned not to hope, only to count the fragile rhythm of her child's breathing. It was the only thing that still felt real. Outside the narrow hospital window, snowflakes swirled in lazy spirals. Inside, machines hummed a soft, relentless lullaby. The air in room 214 hung thick with the weight of waiting. No one expected what would happen next, not when a figure appeared at the end of the hallway, black and white, low to the ground, moving with deliberate, haunting grace. The security footage caught nothing of its arrival. One moment the hallway was empty. The next, it was there. A stray German shepherd, drenched in snowmelt, his coat streaked with ice and his eyes glowing with an intelligence that bordered on the unnatural. He moved as though pulled by a force no one could name, like he had been called not by sound, but by something deeper. Ara's unspoken yearning, perhaps, her silent cry for something, someone. He stopped outside room 214. The hallway outside that room had always been the quietest place in the hospital. Even the most seasoned nurses avoided walking that stretch unless they had to. And yet as the dog appeared, silent, focused, no one tried to stop him. Cameron, the night nurse on duty, was the first to see him. The shepherd padded past her with the calm confidence of someone who belonged. And as he passed, Cameron felt a sudden warmth bloom in her chest, like a voice had whispered inside her heart, "Let him through." She didn't question it. She simply stepped aside. Inside room 214, Era Quinn remained motionless. The monitors around her blinked pale green and soft blue. Her mother sat slouched in the visitor's recliner, wrapped in a hospital blanket, eyes heavy with exhaustion. When the door creaked open, Mara looked up. She froze. A dog was standing in her daughter's hospital room. A stranger, a stray. That should have terrified her, but it didn't, because 12 years ago, Mara had raised a German shepherd named Toby. From puppyhood to old age, he had been her shadow, her comfort, her anchor through the heartbreak of single motherhood and life's relentless storms. He had passed away just 2 winters ago, and the dog standing in front of her now, he looked just like him, the same fur, the same steady gaze, the same quiet presence that made her heart ache and breathe at once. Something shifted in her chest. A thread snapped and rewove itself. Mara didn't speak. She didn't even move. But in her heart, something opened. She nodded. As if that simple gesture was all the invitation the dog needed, he stepped forward with the certainty of purpose. With careful grace, he climbed onto the mattress and settled beside Era. Then gently he placed one paw on her tiny hand. For a moment, there was nothing. Then her fingers twitched. Ara's lips parted. Her voice, paper-thin and fragile as cracked ice, broke the silence. "You really came." Hospital regulations were clear. No animals allowed on patient beds, especially not in critical care. But protocol had long stopped applying to room 214. Just 36 hours earlier, Ara had been moved to palliative care. Her organs were slowing. Her brain barely flickered with signs of life. Dr. Hale had delivered the update himself, tone clinical, detached. Mara hadn't argued. She hadn't even cried. She had simply nodded. So when the dog appeared, a creature so solemn, so still, and yet more alive than anyone in that room, no one had the strength to resist. It was Nurse Sienna who whispered it first. "If he's what's keeping her here, let him stay." No one disagreed. And so the dog, who would soon be called Orion, stayed. At first, he did nothing but lay beside her, his body still, his gaze fixed. Then came the twitch of her fingers, the cracked whisper. Hours passed and Ara's heart rhythm began to stabilize. Her oxygen levels crept higher. Her pupils began to respond to light again. Doctors who once spoke in curt sentences now lingered at the doorway, voices hushed with awe. "She's responding to something," Dr. Hale murmured, eyes fixed on the monitor. "I just don't know what." By the second night, when security asked again about removing the dog, Dr. Hale didn't hesitate. He signed the clearance himself. "She's dying," he said. "If this dog is helping her, he stays. No questions." And from that moment forward, no one asked again. Because somehow, the longer Orion remained, the more Ara began to return. Ara began to return. Her eyes started tracking the voices in the room. She gripped Mara's fingers with gentle strength. She responded to light. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was real. Something inside her was stirring, reclaiming space within her fragile body. On the morning of the third day, with help, she sat up in bed. Her voice, though still barely more than a breath, was unmistakably clear when she turned to her mother and asked, "Can I have some applesauce?" Mara dropped the spoon in shock, hands trembling. In the hallway, nurses openly wept, tears uncontained, unashamed. No one called it a miracle, not yet, but for the first time in weeks they began saying her name again. Ara, not the child in room 214, just Ara. Staff members began to pause outside the room, not to check on monitors or vitals, but simply to see her, to witness something real was unfolding within those walls. It wasn't a cure. It wasn't science. It was something else entirely, a spark of hope. And in room 214, that had become more than enough. By the end of the week, she was no longer the patient quietly fading away. She now sat upright for hours, sometimes sketching childlike doodles with the crayons one nurse had brought her, other times simply watching the snow outside the window. Orion's head rested easily in her lap, his eyes often closed, but his body relaxed in that way dogs do only when they know they are exactly where they're meant to be. But something else began to change. At first it was small, so subtle only the overnight staff noticed. Room 214's temperature would inexplicably drop after midnight, regardless of how high the heat had been set. One nurse whispered that the lights in the room dimmed of their own accord. Another said she'd heard faint whispering near the door, though the room had been empty except for the girl, the mother, and the dog. Orion noticed too. He stopped sleeping through the night. Instead, he sat rigid for hours, his body alert, eyes fixed on the same shadow-drenched corner of the room, the one behind the heart monitor, the one no light ever fully touched. Mara saw it first. She awoke one night to find Orion completely still, muscles tight, eyes locked on that very corner. She called his name softly. He didn't turn. His ears twitched, body tense. He wasn't watching. He was listening, or waiting. The next morning, a new nurse named Ava stepped into room 214 for routine vitals. She was young, unfamiliar with the quiet strangeness that clung to the room like a second layer of air. She entered with a practiced smile, her voice gentle but bright. "Good morning, Ara." Before she could continue, Ara spoke, calm, steady, in a tone far too measured for a child her age. "She doesn't sleep like we do." The room fell into silence. Ava blinked, confused. Mara turned sharply from her chair, startled. Ara's hand moved slowly through Orion's fur, her face unreadable. That afternoon, Dr. Hale returned with the latest brain scans. He came in expecting progress, and he found it. Cortical activity was increasing in areas they had long believed to be unreachable, but he had also started documenting something else: Orion's behavior. In his private notes, he scribbled things no professional journal would ever dare publish. Dog alert again, 3:12 a.m. Patient fixated on corner, no visual stimuli. Temperature drop recorded, 2.1 degrees. He didn't know what to make of it, but he had begun to feel it too. There was something in that room, or worse, something watching it. On the seventh night, the snow outside thickened, blanketing the world in a cold, suffocating silence. Inside room 214, the air was dense with anticipation. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but something was waiting. Ara was asleep, her small hand resting against Orion's fur. Mara dozed in the recliner, wrapped in her cardigan, eyes closed but heart still tethered to the machines. The only light came from the soft, rhythmic glow of the heart monitor. At 3:14 a.m., Orion stood. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply rose from his resting place, every muscle tight with purpose, eyes trained on the corner cloaked in shadow. He took a single step, then another. He positioned himself between Ara and that corner, his tail stiff, his head low. Mara stirred, her breath catching in her chest. She sat up, her pulse pounding. "Ara," she whispered. The girl didn't respond. Then the room buzzed with static. The overhead light flickered violently. A single bulb popped with a sharp crack, and the room was plunged into a trembling, half-darkness. Ara's body seized, her back arched off the mattress, her mouth opened in a scream, but no sound came. The heart monitor shrieked, its tone erratic, a frantic crescendo. Oxygen levels dropped like falling stars. Mara screamed for help, slamming the call button again and again, but no footsteps came down the hallway. And in the flickering dark, Orion lunged. He didn't crash into a wall. He didn't pounce at empty air. He struck something. The snarl that ripped from his throat was deep, guttural, primal. He leapt again, attacking empty space with a fury born of instinct and protection. His claws scraped tile. His teeth snapped. And then, the air shifted. The lights steadied. The machines calmed. The room warmed, like breath returning to a frozen lung. Dr. Hale burst into the room, breathless, eyes wide. He froze at the scene. Shattered light bulb glass on the floor, monitors recalibrating, Mara holding Ara's limp body against her chest, and Orion, still standing guard, his body tense, teeth bared toward an invisible threat. "What happened?" he asked. No one spoke. Ara whimpered softly, her voice barely more than a breath as she nestled into her mother's embrace. "Didn't let it take me." The snow had started to melt, but room 214 still felt like winter. Even with the heater humming softly beneath the windowsill, a chill lingered in the corners, quiet and constant. A tension hung in the air, refusing to lift since the night the lights shattered and something unseen had been fought back. Ara hadn't said much since then. She responded when spoken to, sometimes nodded, offered the occasional smile. But there was a stillness in her now, A hush, like someone who had heard something no one else could and was still listening for more. Mara noticed first how Ara's gaze drifted toward the same shadowed corner each night before she fell asleep. How her fingers moved across Orion's fur, drawing gentle, absent-minded circles. How she no longer hummed during quiet moments, only when Orion growled low and deep, as if warning whatever might be listening. "She's changed," one nurse murmured. "It's not just the healing. It's like she's carrying something." Dr. Hale no longer brought a clipboard. He stayed longer now, said less. Not because he expected updates, there weren't any, but because there was something about room 214 that demanded silence, that asked for presence rather than observation. Then one morning, as the sun filtered through frost-laced windows, Ara looked up from beneath her blanket. "Do names have power?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Mara paused mid-sip, coffee hovering near her lips. "Sometimes," she replied slowly. "Why?" But Ara didn't answer. She just stared out the window. That night it returned. Orion was the first to sense it. His ears twitched, tail stiffened, breath held. The lights dimmed, almost imperceptibly. The air thinned, grew colder. Mara pulled the blanket tighter around them. "What's wrong?" she whispered. Ara didn't look afraid. She looked prepared. "It's back," she said simply. Orion rose, his posture identical to the nights before, positioning himself between the bed and the shadow corner. Same stance, same stillness, same place. And then, without turning her head, Ara spoke. "If I say its name, it can't stay." Mara froze. Her heart surged with maternal fear. "Don't," she wanted to beg. "Don't say anything. Don't invite it. Don't draw it near." But when she looked at her daughter, she saw something steadier than fear. Orion was calm, alert, not bracing for a fight, waiting. "What name?" Mara asked, voice barely audible. Ara's fingers tightened around Orion's fur. She whispered something then, a sound not shaped for human mouths. It was broken glass and grating stone, ancient and sharp. Not English. Not any language Mara had ever heard. The lights flickered violently. The air snapped cold, and for a breathless second, the room froze in time. Then Orion barked. Not like before. This time it was thunder, deep, commanding, final. A sound that shattered whatever had been hiding in the corner. A sound that didn't allow room for shadows. And then, everything lifted. The pressure in the air released like a held breath finally exhaled. The temperature rose. The machine steadied. Ara gasped, falling back into her pillows, her body trembling not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion. Mara rushed to her side. "What did you do?" she asked, voice shaking. "What was that?" Ara opened her eyes slowly, her voice soft but sure. "I said what it didn't want me to know." "And what was that?" "Its name," she whispered. "Now it can't hide." Orion returned to the bed, curling beside her once more, one paw resting protectively across her chest. And for the first time in what felt like forever, room 214 was warm. In the days that followed, something shifted. The room became more than a hospital suite. It became something sacred, unexplainable. Her recovery continued, fast and remarkable. Doctors used words like spontaneous remission, neurological reactivation, unexpected cellular regeneration, but they knew none of those words explained what happened, and none explained Orion. So they stopped trying. They simply watched as Ara moved from comatose to conscious, from silent to laughing. Watched her draw, walk, speak, and always Orion remained by her side. Not questioned, not explained, simply accepted. One afternoon, days before discharge, Dr. Hale sat beside Mara. In his hands, he held a sealed envelope. "This was left anonymously at the front desk," he said. I think it's about him. Mara opened it slowly. Inside was a faded photograph, sun-worn and delicate. A young girl, no older than Ara, stood in the snow beside a German shepherd. Not just any dog, him. Same deep, intelligent eyes, same upright ears, same proud, protective stance. On the back of the photo, a handwritten note, 1952. Room 214. He saved her too. Mara stared, breath caught in her throat. This can't be possible, she whispered. Dr. Hale leaned in. That's not all. I did some digging. Every decade, sometimes more, room 214 gets one patient, one unexplained recovery, and always there's a dog, black and white. Not on record, no name. He appears, then disappears. Why? Mara breathed. Why now? Ara answered that night, quietly while stroking Orion's fur. He didn't come for me, she said. He came because it came back. The shadow, she nodded. It's old. It waits in quiet places, places where people think they've been forgotten. That's when it feeds. But Orion, he remembers. He fought it once. He lost someone. Mara stared, unable to look away. You mean he's not just a dog? Ara shook her head. He's more. Maybe not more than a dog, just more than time. That night, Orion stood once more in the corner, not braced to fight, just watching. The lights didn't flicker. The cold didn't return. The room was still, and so was he. On discharge day, the halls fell into an odd, respectful silence. Ara walked slowly, bundled in her pink coat. Orion patted at her side. No applause, no fanfare, just reverence. At the hospital doors, Mara turned to Dr. Hale. Will he go with us? Dr. Hale looked at the dog, then at Ara. He came for her, he said quietly. I think he'll stay until she no longer needs him. Ara knelt, pressing her forehead to Orion's. You remembered me, she whispered. And perhaps he had. Perhaps they had met before, in another time, another fight, another fading room. Maybe some spirits don't return as ghosts. Maybe they come back as guardians. And maybe love, when it's deep enough, transcends time, body, even species. Orion stood silent. No wag, no bark. But he walked beside her, not as a pet, not as a therapy dog, as something older, something sacred. And as the doors opened, as light spilled in and Ara stepped into it, Mara turned back one last time. Room 214 stood quiet, but not empty.